So, hi everyone. Today I would be giving you some information of the different types of data that exist in an organization. So, basically, there are three types of data: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Tertiary is otherwise called as third party data. So, let us, under through this video, let us understand what is exactly primary, secondary, and third party data. And also, with this data, you'll be able to make a decision at a point as to at which time you would be able to use what type of a data. So now why am I talking about this is because basically when you do any research or you need to do an analysis, definitely you need data to do that analysis and to make certain decisions or to take certain actions. So for this type of data, first you need to know what type of data exists around you or in your organization, and based on that you'll be able to take up a decision. So let's get into it. The very first type of data is called as primary data. So this data is collected by an individual or group or an organization directly. Now let me give you an example. So if you look over here, examples are employee feedbacks, customer surveys. So in an organization, if the HR department wants to take up some employee feedbacks, it's directly taken and given to the employees, and the feedback is collected. So it's not going into the hands of anyone else, or no one else is collecting and giving back these data to the HR team. It's a direct interaction with the audience, and the data is collected. So this is called as primary data. So if you see the methods of collecting this type of primary data by an organization or an individual or group, it's by interviews, surveys. Then if you have any applications, the applications also get data, and also websites, so forms and any other form of data that comes through the organization or individual websites, you can collect data. So if you see the advantages of this data, now since you know the problem statement, why you are collecting the data from your audience, you would be able to understand how much of data you need, what data you need, in what format you need it. So all these are different variants of the data. So by which you by knowing how much of data you want, from who you want it, and how you want it, the data that is being collected will be definitely accurate and of high quality. Okay, because you will be setting the format, you will be setting the amount of data that needs to be collected. So definitely it will be way of a high quality when compared to the others. And if you look at the drawbacks, it's time consuming. Definitely if you're collecting data through interviews, surveys, applications, websites, definitely it's going to be time consuming, because setting up interviews and collecting data, it's not a very easy task, depending on your audience's time availability and other aspects, setting up the questions, setting up your questionnaires. All these will take time, so it's not readily available at that time, at that moment. So the drawbacks of you taking this type of data is it is time consuming. So this is about primary data. The next type of data is secondary data. So secondary data is the data that is collected by a group or organization from its audience directly, and then it is sold. Okay, this is something that you need to note. It is sold or it is handed over to someone else. So it is if you look in another perspective, it's an organization or group's primary data, and that data they sell it to other people. Now let's say you have different colleges hold staff and student records, and if certain amount of information, maybe it can be shared to book publications. So the when selling their own data, definitely it becomes a secondary data for the publications, the agency, whereas for the colleges or any educational institutes, it becomes as their primary data. So selling one's own primary data to another agent or to another organization, it becomes secondary data. So always data that's not been collected by you, it's collected by someone else and then given to you, we can consider that as secondary data. So if you see the methods of getting this secondary data to your hand, it's by contacting the secondary data source owners. Okay, so let's say you want information about online store people, so you definitely have to go into an online retailer, and then you will be able to get information. And then you need you should be having the access to published secondary data. So sometimes secondary data, it's not always free and open source. So definitely you need to go through a lot of steps and processes in order to access that data. You need to be authorized in order to access that published data. So this is the way in which you can access secondary data. And if you look at the advantages of this, data is accurate and of high quality because it's someone else's primary data. So most of the time it will be accurate and of high quality, and it's also quick to access. Since at a point of time you don't have data with you, but you need data to do some analysis, you can always, if the data is going to be open source, then you can collect the data. Or if you have to go to an agent, instead of going through the pain process of collecting your data, you can always contact the sources and get the data. When you look at the drawbacks, sometimes there would be data quality issues. Okay, and the data quality issues is because you might need data in a particular format, but the people providing you with data, they will provide it with a different format. And sometimes data may not be there might be different quality issues, okay, missing values, duplicates. All these can be certain quality loops in your data. So that's one drawback. And the next one is it may not be free. Okay, not every time data is free and easily accessible. Definitely sometimes you need to pay for data, okay, to access certain data. So this type of situations lead to drawbacks of secondary data. And if you look at third party data, this is the data collected and aggregated from various sources by third party organizations. Now, let's say you have different organizations that collect data relating to one particular aspect. Let's say I'm going to collect, let's say, weather reports data. Okay, so I can collect this data from different meteorological stations, and I can combine that data and have a full data set of all my weather information from all meteorological departments. So this is called as third party data. Okay, so you have an agent, agency or group that collects data from multiple sources and combines them, and that becomes third party data. Why it becomes third party data is because they have not collected that data directly. Okay, they never went and collected data. They just collected data from many sources, combined it, and then they are providing that data. So that's called as third party data. If you look at the collection methods, how you can access third party data is you have certain online data sets readily available, depending on astrological information. You have weather reports, you have crime data sets, anything you have related to sports. You have all your data sets that can be online. You can access that data. And then you have contacting the third party organizations. Of course, if your data is very specific and you need to go to certain people in order to get that data, you should get in contact with them and access your data. If you look at the advantages of this is it's a large data set. Since data is being combined from many sources, you'll have a pretty good large data set. Okay, so imagine you collecting data from you need a data set of, let's say, 1 lakh records. Sometimes manually going and collecting that is going to be impossible. And even maybe data that might be provided from another organization, they may not be able to provide that. But when you go with online data sets, sometimes since data is being accumulated from different sources, it can be large, and it's definitely useful. So that's an advantage. And the second one, it's quick to access, because sometimes data sets, they are available online, they are open source, you can quickly access them. And sometimes if they are not available, then as I said, for the same as secondary data, you need to take the further steps in order to access data. The next, if you see the drawbacks of data, the data quality. Okay, here the data quality is going to be a big issue, because since data is collected from many sources, you don't know, how your data is going to come in. The format will be different, you'll have duplicate values, you might have a bias, you don't know from which type of audience this data was collected, you will have missing values, you'll have invalid data, you'll have format issues. All this can be a lot of disadvantages of third party data, and that you're collecting. And also the second one, if you see, it may not be free again. Okay, depending on your data that you want to access, sometimes you need to pay for data. So definitely it may not be free, which is another drawback. So now that we know the three types of data available, Now imagine you're in a scenario that you have to do analysis for your organization, and you're given a problem statement. Now you have to do the analysis. So let's understand, how do you take the decision of choosing what type of data to use? So when you look at this, first one, make sure you define the problem very well, because if you make a wrong decision, if you interpret the problem wrongly, then definitely the data and your analysis is going to go in the wrong direction. So always define the problem well, and after that understand and determine the time you have in hand. Okay, so it might be a very short time project given to you to do the analysis and give some insights, or to give what is the current situation. So sometimes you might have a long period of time, sufficient time to do your analysis. So always when you have time, okay, that's one option that you have. So when you have time, you can always go in for collecting your own data. So first decide what data has to be collected, then decide how data will be collected, and decide how much data has to be collected. So depending on your problem that you want to solve, decide what data has to be collected, and how much data has to be collected, and how data is going to be collected. So how data is being collected is, you can go on with the different data collection and discovery methods, which is, as I said, interviews, surveys. These are different ways in which you can collect data. Now assume that you have very less time, you just need to work with data that's already available. You have no time to go in for interviews and questionnaires and contacting people to get data. At that time, what you can do is, you can use existing data. So at that time, you decide which type of source you want to access your data from. It can be either secondary data or third party data, and decide what data to use. So once you get your data, you'll have different data, secondary and tertiary third party data in your hand. So once you take a look at that data, analyze what data you want and what data you're going to use, and then you can proceed with your analysis. So this is some information that I wanted to give you about primary, secondary, and third party, and what are the ways in which you can collect them, and what are the advantages and disadvantages, and how you can take a decision to use what data. I hope this video was informative to you. So if you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do subscribe to this channel, and also do share your feedbacks. Thank you.